Hi, my name is Eric Earwood, and I want to make a video, or probably more, but yeah. Anyway, I would like to make videos about world building and such. That's kind of like what this video is, and the beginning of that, hopefully. I kind of want to, maybe just for funsies, I'm a very, very poor, bored college kid, so anything to do, and an aspiring fantasy book writer, so stuff to kind of do on the side in my free time. So I want to do maybe 1 to 7 videos, or 5 to 7 videos a month. Um, so solidly, I want to try to get about at least kind of 4 out that I kind of know what I want to do with them specifically, but that's kind of a world building unpack. So that's what I'm going to kind of do today after I get through the introductions and stuff. So I kind of plan on explaining world building from my perspective. I'm not a professional, or I don't really. It's a very organic process that I kind of developed into a creative writer. So I'm going to share that creative process and what my personal thoughts are without any sort of influenced, I guess, dogma, because I don't have any reference of like any professional instruction on how to create a good fantasy universe. Two, I want to do book reviews. So I read a lot of fantasy. I'm a nerd. I love fantasy, and I wanna unpack that and talk about books and fantasy as a legitimate form of literature. I think oftentimes even like I think fantasy gets undercut, that it can't have depth, and I'd like to both. In those videos, I'd like to spend time talking about the quality of the fantasy work and the world building behind it, and then the actual depth of message and parts of the piece of literature that can actually be extracted and used and actually are something good. Then I want to do show reviews, and again, huge nerd. I watch a lot. Anything from kids' cartoons that I think have a good fantasy element and a good message to anime, and then things like Game of Thrones and stuff. So that's gonna be that, and I probably won't have completed the show I'm watching every time I make one, so there will probably be follow-ups. Like I'll have a show review, and there will also be another one, and it might happen in the same month, and again, 5 to 7. So that's what those kind of like flexible numbers are, because like we'll probably have more than that. If I feel like following up on a show, or it'll happen the next month, and I'll finish, because I might only have watched so much of a show, and that's all I can review and talk about. I plan on doing movie reviews, which that probably will be the most poorly kept up ones. I'm not a movie person. I have a very short attention span. I'm a severely ADD person. I'm on a pretty high medication dose for my attention. So I don't think I'll be able to get through movies. I'm not a fan of them now, but I will attempt. But 5 to 7 once again. So if that one gets skipped out, it'll probably get replaced with something else. The more flexible categories are like so I want to do updates on my own creative work. So I do write. I write a lot of short stories. I'm trying to write a book. I want to get around a 350-page book published by around December next year, so 2021. I'm several chapters in, and it's so far I've shared it with people, and I think it's gone very well. So I legitimately want to do that. So yeah. So then video essays. I love research. Again, I'm in college right now, so I'm just starting out my degree, and it's rough. I'm not doing well, but regardless, I love science. I love things like that. So yeah, little like research unpacks that'll like just any topic that I'm like, that's cool. I'm gonna rant and monologue about that, because that's what this is. This is really just an outlet for me to monologue my ideas. And then random stuff. So honestly, if there's anything that doesn't fall into that category, that might end up being like the 7th, 6th video in the month. Like, I just want to do something random, something fun. Like, this is how you make sourdough bread from scratch, like capturing your own yeasts. Like, that's something I'd totally do. Or basic, like, here's red lettuce and how to use it as a pH indicator. Like, that's random, completely random things. Or like, I don't know, like nature vlogs. I love going for walks and like looking at fungi and different types of plants, and so going on that and being like I'm not a professional, I'm not a genius, I don't have anything memorized, but look at that. Isn't that cool? Let's try to find this and then cut out the massive section of me trying to sit there for 30 minutes and figuring out what the hell I'm looking at. um, all right, with that out of the way, that was, yep. Let's do the first world building unpacked. So, biggest thing in world building, I think that is something that I think really catches people up is the synthesis of inspiration. So, or at least that's kind of how I view it. Again, this is all from my own mind. I don't have any sort of research in world building. I'm not a professional. This is a kid who was very nerdy growing up and really loved fantasy, still loves fantasy, and writes about fantasy and like how I create a cinematic universe for myself and how I think the process should go. So this is a very opinionated thing, and this will not work for everybody. I don't think anything works for anybody, but I think that every time you watch any sort of thing that's instructional on a creative process, you should not be trying to mimic that instruction. You should be taking elements that you think will work for you and seem like they are cohesive to how you behave. So with that in mind, inspiration. So everybody has a different creative process and everybody has different interests. So someone might like one, so you know what, you might admire something. So I'll use an example. I love World of Warcraft. Legitimately, I play it a lot. I have one of each class. I'm that kid. So I love World of Warcraft. I've been playing since I can remember. My dad had a subscription when I was born, and I grew up making characters, getting them to level 2 and deleting them until I got old enough to actually commit. But what I mean is, so when I write, obviously, having that sort of attachment, because I started reading the lore of World of Warcraft, like really getting into reading the lore of TV shows when I was in around 3rd grade, and I started to, memorize it. So it's just stuff that I find fun. I have very niche interests, and I really go to town on them, so I have an encyclopedic level knowledge of World of Warcraft. So obviously it shows up in my creative work. So like what I kind of mean is at what point are you taking inspiration and synthesizing it into a unique idea and putting that into your writing, or are you copying? Because if you're copying something, I think it's also like it can be fun, and like that's also like a completely valid form of a creative expression. If you want to vent your ideas about somebody's work and admire it and write your own little headcanon or fan fiction bit about it, that's something entirely different. But like when you're actually trying to write like your own thing, I think it can be very hard to, keep the elements of what has inspired you, but then also still feel yourself, like you are doing something unique. Like this is your work. This is nobody else's. And I think that people are often scared sometimes that they are copying. I know I do. I'll be writing something and I'm like, oof, I feel like this is too close to something else. And I don't think that you can't just say, well, everything's been done once, at least, like it's not wrong, honestly. That is honestly something that you should take into account of. You cannot, when it comes to like fantasy, you really cannot claim fantasy as your intellectual property. Because like a variation of idea is not yours anymore. It's not like research, it's something else. It's much more fluid. It's to add to the creative body and the creative thinking process. So once you put out a piece of media, expect it to influence things. And so don't feel bad about influences upon you from other pieces of creative work. So for instance, one of the things that World of Warcraft made me do is so there are titans, right? And titans are born in planets. So there are planets and there are spirits attached to those planets that are sentient beings. And those planets are alive. They think, they feel, they are intellectual entities. I love that. I think that is phenomenal. And that became a very big piece in my writing when that really started to get developed in the World of Warcraft chronology. So I love living worlds. The idea of this planet has a soul attached to it, that it is a sentient being on a capacity of thinking that you can't comprehend as a human being. It's not a person, it's a planet. There's a distinction there. It's alive, it's sentient, it has a soul, it's a thinking entity, but it's not you. It's not an organic life form. And stuff like that. Like, I think that people might read that and be like, well, if I do that, that's copying World of Warcraft. And no. it's taking an element of it and using it in your own work, but you do have to put in the effort of repackaging it to be yours. Um, and what I mean by that is, like, for instance, my planets are not gods. They are not super powerful entities. So the few that I've written about what they do, it's more of they will spontaneously manifest their like this, like an avatar sort of thing in a random entity that's born on their planet. So some organic life form, like a human being, let's say Earth was doing this and I was it. So I wouldn't even know I was like that. But I might have some special abilities and be able to unlock some stuff and figure out how to use certain powers because of my connection with the planet and the fact that it's thinking, or rather it's feeling device. That's kind of what the avatar acts as. It is the information taken organ of the planet. Sort of the fact that, like, we are the universe experiencing itself. So, like, and that like right there, that is synthesis. So I took the idea, that saying of I am the universe experiencing itself, and then I took a concept from World of Warcraft about living worlds, and then in my own fantasy writing I synthesized those together, and that became something new. And that's how creative synthesis works at its core. And if you feel after a while like that is still too similar, put in honest effort of changing it. Another thing about that is synthesis, true synthesis, where something really merges together cleanly and it really becomes your own. That takes time. I have been doing creative writing on the story that I am trying to turn into a book. The different aspects and elements of that story have been coming together since I was in at least 8th grade, and if not before. But that's really when I started to write things down. So that's something to point out. Give it time. If an idea feels clunky or if it does not feel like it's yours yet, give it time. Writing takes time. Think about it. Fantasize about it. Have a dreamy fascination with your own work. You should love the universe you've built. Add to it. Get crazy with it. Make it weird and make it yours. Second thing, inhibitions. So inhibitions are a big part in fantasy writing because, you have to think about the fact that we have preconceptions based off of our socioeconomic, our cultural upbringings. They give us certain beliefs about how things should be. And you might think, it doesn't seem like it would correlate that much with what I'm doing creatively, but it has a massive impact because it's the core of how you think. It contributes to how you think about things and what you're going to be able to write down and come up with. So, for instance, one of the things that I think people oftentimes talk about struggling with is naming. So, at least for me, when I think about the naming conventions that are implanted within me from, like, being an English speaker in the Western world, female names and softly, I think is how you would refer to it. I'm not a linguist, so linguist. So I don't really know what the specific terminology is, but they end with A's, vowel sounds. Anna or Sarah or Olivia and things like that, and masculine names like my own, Eric, or my brother is Alec, very similar, or Luke or Michael, like they end with consonants. So like those names end with consonants. So it's like, when you're naming, it can be very hard to get caught up on. If you have a male character, they have to have a male sounding name. They also have to have a name you like. And that's another thing, is liking the names you do. And it might be weird to hear, like, you don't have to like the names that you name your characters, but you seriously don't. You might be able to put your favorite name in there, like you really like that name, but for the most part, they need a name. They need a functional title, a way to refer to them. So that's another thing that I kind of stopped worrying about, is I don't have to love, rather, every name I make. And I kind of try to throw out the ideas of masculine and feminine names, which gender has a huge component in fantasy work, in what I do at least, whether it's high fantasy, high sci-fi, like different planets and aliens, different dimensions and stuff. Like, it might seem kind of weird, but gender is a massive inhibitor of your creative abilities. Kind of the example I was thinking of in my own writing is, I have a god within my cinematic universe, and it is a hive mind. It is this incredibly powerful being that is split up amongst millions. So it's a fungus, and the fungus infects people, and so it's men and women, or more than that, depending on the species and the people it infects, because it's not just infecting humans, and humans are a very small part of my cinematic universe. But my point is that funguses on Earth can have upwards of hundreds of thousands, if I'm not mistaken, at least thousands, I think. Still, fact check me. I know it's more than two, way more than three, biological sexes. And of course, gender and sex is different, but I'm not going to debate the intricacies of that. That's what I believe, though, wholeheartedly. But that sort of conceptualism of there is a set gender is really, really crippling to your ability to think creatively. Like if you're dealing with a fungal species, or if you're making something that's completely new, like, it becomes immediately touchable and graspable by the audience if it has gender, which is good sometimes. Sometimes you want that. Sometimes you instantly want them to be able to comprehend what you're talking about. But other times, it causes your creative work to fall flat. And you don't want that. No, you really don't want that as a writer. So if you're doing high fantasy, of course, every scenario is different. But basically, it's like, if I'm writing about a fungal species, then, they might find mammalian races that I'm writing about as being silly, completely, utterly just, why do you care about what your name sounds like? We don't even have names. We identify each other chemically, like, it's things like that. They might not even speak. So inhibitions matter, or rather your preconceptions and how your upbringing and your biases really influence your creative abilities. So that's something to think about if you're world building. And then my kind of third tip for world building from like my first rendition of these videos, and like what I'm going to start trying to do: share your work. Like, tell everybody who is willing to listen. I recently went to a party, and people started kind of joking about fan fiction, and two people at the party were like, I'm going to read mine. And I was like, oh yeah, please, because if you guys do this, I'm going to read mine. And of course theirs were funny, and they were making fun of it, and like, this is just something I do in my free time, and like, this isn't, it wasn't necessarily like they were trying to write books or anything, but they were like, haha, like, this is funny stuff. And then I was over here, and I unpacked like the first two chapters of what I planned to be like a legitimate novel, like fantasy novel, and was like, I was just reading that, and it was not funny. So that was kind of what I was doing with that. But yeah, so that's kind of like my final tip. Tell anybody who's willing to listen, and read your stuff over and over again. If you feel like you don't have the passion behind it, like if you've lost some of your creative energy, let it sit. Come back to your stuff after a month or 2 or 4 or half a year if you need to, because reading it after that amount of time can really help reinvigorate how you feel about your own creative work. Because I know that's something that happens to me as I'm reading it, and I get to a point where I'm like, this is bad. Like, this is horrible. Because it's the same way with any creative process. When you're the person making it, you see the flaws more than anybody else will, because you made it, so you really know where you feel that it feels flat. So come back to it and read it and be like, oh wait, that's cool. Like, that was actually really, really good. Now that I've forgotten how I came to that point. So that's like my recommendation with that. And with that, I will go ahead and kind of plan my next video, and hopefully people see this and you'll come back. And I don't know, I guess like and subscribe. Maybe you appreciate that, and we'll see how my plan for video uploads go. But I hope everybody appreciates the little bit of creative writing pointers I have in this, and kind of what I plan to do with this. So, adios.